Evening and welcome to the September meeting of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. I'm Steve Holeko. I'm the political director of CCPC, and we are guessing that there's going to be a lot of questions for this meeting. So I want to introduce our tech person, Deb Klein, who's going to explain how we are going to handle questions tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Everyone will remain on mute. So if you would like to ask a question, you have one of two choices when that time comes. You can either put the question in the chat, and I will be monitoring that, or you can raise your hand. And I'm not talking this way. I'm talking going down to the bottom of your screen where it says reactions. Click the up arrow, and you will see the raise hand function right there. And what that does is it puts you up in the queue so we can see that you've raised your hand. So enjoy, everyone. I've known Kelly for a lot of years, so I know that tonight is going to be really informative for everyone.
One of the things that we have found through numerous Zoom meetings the last few years, and we are getting back to live meetings, but one of the advantages of a Zoom meeting is we can get speakers from out of town. So we're going to kind of, eventually have the meeting format mixed. But anyways, what we found with the Zoom meetings is when we talk about things that have links, it's better to send an email the next day with the links and with an explanation as opposed to putting it in the chat, because sometimes folks are going to the chat and they're looking and then they miss something on the meeting. So tomorrow you're going to get an email with a lot of links and a lot of upcoming events. I'm going to explain the upcoming events towards the end of the meeting. But the few of the links, one is going to be become a member of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. And every time we have a meeting, we have people show up who aren't members, and that's great. And so if you're not a member of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus and you chose to come to this meeting, you probably would like to become a member of the Progressive Caucus. Membership in our organization is free. We do ask, if possible, you can become a sustaining member and donate a little bit each month. And we ask that because we are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staffed. But we have an office and we have bills to pay each month. And so we depend on small contributions from folks to pay those bills. So there'll also be a donate link in that email. And if you can help us out, that would be great. We also record all of our meetings on our YouTube channel. And so when you get the email tomorrow, it'll have a link to that video. We're actually sending it out to folks. We had 59 folks register, but not all of them will show up. Maybe they would like to take a look at the meeting afterwards. And we found that more people look at the video of the event than actually show up for the event. So, that'll be in there as well. The links to the upcoming events, Kelly and I are going to, kind of explain as the meeting goes on. One other thing I want to mention before we get started is the midterm elections. And I read an article this morning that was titled, "Why Conventional Wisdom is All Wrong About the Midterms." And then the caption underneath said, "A pandemic, an abortion decision, and insurrectionists mean anything can happen." Now, the conventional wisdom in midterms, most of you know this, is that the party in power is going to lose seats. The party in power is going to lose a lot of seats if the economy is tanking and if the president's approval ratings are tanking. That's not happening this time. For one thing, the president's approval ratings are ticking up. The economy is doing better. But you have heard the most important election of our lifetime, probably every election cycle. That's how I remember it. But in some ways, this one really is, particularly since the Democrats have a chance. They're not likely to get wiped out. think of what we're fighting. Think of if the Republicans gain seats, how Donald Trump's fascism is going to look. Think of the main topic of this meeting, how the taking away of the right to an abortion is going to look if the party that took that right away gains seats. So please look at this election as maybe not the most important one of our lifetime. I think it is. Now, and I know, okay, we don't necessarily have the most progressive candidates. Tim Ryan, for example. But ask yourself this: if Joe Biden gets to appoint another Supreme Court justice, who would you rather have voting on it? Tim Ryan or Hillbilly Elegy? Okay. It's a bill has already been introduced in the Senate to ban abortion nationwide. Who would you rather have voting on that bill? Tim Ryan or Hillbilly Elegy? See that this list goes on and on. There's an additional component to the midterms locally. As most of you know, one of our members, one of my good friends, Dave Brock, got elected party chair. Now, Dave, it's going to be a long road to hoe, but he's going to try to make the party more progressive. The best thing that can happen to Dave publicly is he gets elected in June and voter turnout and Democratic votes rise dramatically in Cuyahoga County in November. So please keep all of these things in mind as we approach the midterms. One of the things that we're doing is we've got a lot of events, a lot of things you can do for our endorsed candidates for what's called the coordinated campaign. That's the ODPs. You choose, what's best for you. But that's going to be in our newsletter tomorrow. And if you're not a Progressive Caucus member, please become one so that you can get that newsletter. And we're going to start promoting these events and in our Sunday emails as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our main speaker tonight, the Director of Pro-Choice Ohio, Kelly Copeland.
Hi, thank you.
You can do this.
Okay. We actually have things to applaud today, but I'm going to save that for the end, unless maybe some of you have already heard the news, but I'm going to save it because so much of what I usually have to talk about is depressing things, and I have good news for you today. But my name is Kelly Copeland. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of Pro-Choice Ohio. We are, if you're not familiar with us, we were formerly known as NARAL Pro-Choice Ohio, and we are statewide abortion and reproductive freedom advocacy organization. I have been in this position for 20 years. I feel like Deb and I have had weirdly parallel careers, weaving in and out of labor, repro, and oddly, the American Heart Association. Known Deb for a really long time, and just really grateful to be here with all of you. I thought what I'd talk about is just a little bit about what's happened since Dobbs, what's coming up with the election, particularly the state Supreme Court, give you some good news, talk about what's going to happen after the election, the lame duck session that's coming, and of course, everyone's favorite topic, potential ballot initiative. If there's anything in there and things that you can do to help. If there's anything that you want to know about that I haven't kind of listed out there, drop it in the chat, and I'm sure we'll have time for questions. So what time do you want me to wrap up so that we can really get into questions, Steve? What time do you guys usually like to end this?
Well, we can go 7:30 to 8 for the whole thing. I
Okay.
need about 15 minutes at the end.
Okay, great. All right. Well, for those of you who have been following this, you know that last September, the U.S. Supreme Court decided to take the case out of Mississippi, the Dobbs case. We knew then that that was a very bad harbinger. that they had agreed to take that case, which was basically a pre-viability ban, a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade. And we knew that was bad, of course, because President Trump had packed the Supreme Court. And so they now had the majority on the court, unlike previous challenges. And for those of you who follow the state legislature closely, Ohio and other states like Mississippi have been passing, because of their gerrymandered state legislative districts, one restriction after another to try to create a variety of challenges to Roe. So some of them were based on how far along in pregnancy, some of them were based on the reason a person was having an abortion, but nonetheless, they were trying to provide the Supreme Court with kind of a menu of options that they could choose from as a challenge to Roe versus Wade. The Dobbs case was the one that the court chose. As you know, in the spring, I guess it was in May, something that is, I hate to use the word unprecedented because everything's unprecedented anymore, but there was actually a leak in the decision, and we saw that the final decision was actually quite close to that leak. And that's when we knew for sure that they were going to move, not just to uphold the Mississippi ban, that gestational ban, that time limit ban on abortion, but they were going to use this to overturn Roe versus Wade, which is what they did on June the 24th. In Ohio, what that meant, some states, they had pre-Roe bans on the books that went into effect immediately. Others had what they call trigger bans, which meant that their law said that if something like that happened, abortion would be banned within a certain time frame. Some of them were immediate, some of them were 90 days. Ohio didn't have any of that, but what we did have was a couple of different bans on abortion that were pending in federal court. The worst of which was basically a 6-week ban. It said that, and this was signed into law in 2019 by Governor Mike DeWine. And what it said was no one can get an abortion in Ohio. No one can provide an abortion legally in Ohio to any patient if fetal cardiac activity has been detected. And that happens very early in pregnancy, basically around 5 to 6 weeks. That's often at a point in pregnancy before someone who's not trying to become pregnant realizes they're pregnant. That's a couple of weeks after a missed period. That's a very short time frame. And given all of the restrictions that we have in Ohio, you have to, you have to pay for it yourself. Your insurance doesn't cover it if you're on Medicaid or if you work for the state. So you have to come up with the money. We have a 22 visit requirement. So you have to go to the clinic twice. You have to wait at least 24 hours between those visits. It's very complicated to get an abortion in Ohio. So when you limit that time, you make it extremely difficult for anyone to access care in the state of Ohio. We knew that because that 6-week ban was being challenged in federal court and it had been blocked temporarily while that was working its way through the courts, we knew that Ohio's Attorney General, Dave Yost, and Governor Mike DeWine were going to rush into federal court when we lost the Dobbs case and ask that the federal court lift the stay, lift that stay and allow that 6-week ban to go into effect. We knew that was going to happen. We didn't expect it to happen before sundown. That was, to be honest, quite shocking. Typically in a case like this, if there are lawyers here, that in a case like that, typically, the judge would allow the attorneys, in this case for the clinics, a period of time to respond. The ruling came out at like 10:20 in the morning, and they had to respond by 3, and by 5:30, abortion was essentially banned in Ohio. There were patients who had appointments the next day. Clinics stayed through the night calling and getting a hold of patients, having to cancel appointments because they knew which ones, would no longer be legal. And it was, patients cried. they wail. It was the first wave of what has been now months of suffering, needless suffering. People have, some people have been able to get abortion access in Ohio in that very small window. A lot of people haven't. And Ohio's abortion clinics like preterm in Cleveland, I can't say enough about what they and their team have been doing to try to take care of patients. And also the abortion funds in Ohio, the Aggie Fund, the Abortion Fund of Ohio, the Jubilee Fund. They have been doing absolutely heroic work to help people who need an abortion get an abortion out of state. There have been so much collaboration between abortion providers here in Ohio and those in other states, as well as logistical and financial support for people who need to go out of state to access care. But that has been an extremely complicated patchwork and changing situation because, as you know, there have been court cases going on in all of the surrounding states. So it's been legal and then banned in Kentucky and then legal again. Indiana, it was legal, and now as of tomorrow, it will be illegal. Many patients in Ohio were going to Indiana to access care. They will no longer be able to do that. A lot of people were going to Michigan, and there have been some legal back and forths there. Largely that has remained available, but they have a major election and a ballot initiative. So we don't know what happens there after November. So it is an extremely complicated situation for people who need access to abortion and those who are helping people who need access to abortion. So, one of the things that, you can do if you're interested in being helpful is to, if you're able, to make a donation to preterm or to one of these abortion funds. They can use all the help they can get. The need has just been tremendous. So that's what's been going on. There was good news though today. The attorneys for the clinics first went straight to the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio, and they asked under the state constitution for a stay on the 6-week ban. They said, look, the state constitution does not allow this, and that, this should not be allowed to proceed. We would like you to put a stay on this while we have the opportunity to argue this case before the state Supreme Court. They basically sat on it. They did not offer a stay, and then they sat on the case. So the attorneys withdrew the case from the state Supreme Court and refiled. They filed in Hamilton County Court. And they asked, they ended up getting, I'm going to look it up because I want to make sure I tell you the right person. Where is it? Oh, no. They filed before Judge Christian Jenkins. And they argued this case last week, the week before. And they argued that this was a violation of the state Supreme Court. Or the state constitution. It should not be into effect. And they asked for a temporary restraining order, with a restraining order for 14 days. Today, in what I would call a blockbuster decision, Judge Jenkins agreed. Judge Jenkins said clearly that this is a violation of the state constitution and of case law, that and pointed out the suffering that has happened as a result of this egregious law. Talked about some of the cases that you've heard about, sexual assault survivors and minors having been denied care, but also others that I'm sure you haven't heard about, that their stories were brought to the court. And also spoke about, many of you will remember, after passage of the Affordable Care Act, conservatives put an amendment on the ballot to amend the state constitution, trying to undercut the Affordable Care Act. And it said very clearly in it that you cannot ban the sale or purchase of health care in the state of Ohio. Well, that came around and bit them in the ass a little bit today. And I don't think they're too happy about it. I might have told them back when that passed that that was going to happen. And I might be having a little bit of an I told you so dance over here today, but I'll just keep that between us. So this is in effect for 14 days. So for 14 days, it goes back to the way it was before Roe, which means that clinics can provide care to patients through 21 weeks and 6 days, after last menstrual period, basically 20 weeks. So they can get that care, but that's only for the next 14 days. There will be more court proceedings where hopefully the judge will grant a longer term stay while this works its way through the courts. We all know where that's going to end up. That will end up back at the state Supreme Court. And as you all know, we have 3 seats on the state Supreme Court up for election. Chief Justice seat is vacant. 2 incumbents are running. One is Sharon Kennedy, who is so egregious on this issue that when she was as a justice on the Supreme Court, while she was hearing a case involving abortion in Toledo, she went and spoke at a fundraiser for Toledo Right to Life and refused to recuse herself. It's astonishing how in the bag she is for anti-abortion organizations and refused to recuse herself. Then you have Pat Fisher, who is a current justice on the court, who compared Roe versus Wade to Dred Scott and slavery. It's appalling, his judicial viewpoints on this. And then you have Pat DeWine, who, that's Mike DeWine's son, and constantly refuses to recuse himself on cases that have to do with his father. These are 3 rubber stamps for anti-abortion policies. They're not going to read the Constitution. They're not going to look at case law. They're going to rubber stamp whatever Mike DeWine, David Yost, and the state legislature want. That is not what Ohioans need or deserve from their state Supreme Court. We have an opportunity to change that. Jennifer Bruner, who is currently a justice, she's running for Chief Justice, and Judges Marilyn Zayas and Terry Jamieson are running and challenging the other 2 justices. There's an opportunity for us to elect a court that will give us a fair hearing when we get there, and one that will also do something about this gerrymandering, which is what got us here in the first place. I mean, how many times has Mike DeWine and the Redistricting Commission refused to follow the state constitution? They claim to be this law and order policy, but it's only when it's a law that they want. It's only when it's a policy that they want. They flout it every other time. And so we have an opportunity to elect a court. It is arguably the most important thing that we can do. But as Steve said, there's so many important things. We have an opportunity to take the US Senate, which is important so that we can pass the Women's Health Protection Act. We can't do that without changes to the filibuster. Also the John Lewis Voting Act, so many other things that we need, not just to protect abortion access, but just in the case of the state Supreme Court, we need to protect abortion access. We also need to protect democracy. And the fact that the people who are trying to make everyone's reproductive health decisions for them are the same people who are trying to disenfranchise everyone and who are undermining, lowercase d democracy, that is not a coincidence. These are people who want to rule the state of Ohio. They do not want to represent or serve the people of Ohio. And they are dangerously close to being able to cement that with this election. So we had great news in court today. It affirmed everything that we had said. But now we have the election. Obviously, I'm talking to a very sophisticated group of people when it comes to these candidates. But there's also, I think, something that people aren't really talking about and that is the redistricting commission. The maps that we have are only 2-year maps. We are not stuck with these maps for 10 years. So, governor is important for all the reasons that you already know. And because Mike DeWine has treated the Ohio Department of Health as a harassment tool against abortion providers and not as a health regulatory agency. And that has to stop. I mean, that's not good for public health, and it's not good governance. But the governor also has a tremendous amount of power when it comes to appointments to the state medical board. I mean, the head of Ohio Right to Life was just appointed to his 3rd term on the state medical board. Do you have any idea how terrifying that is to people who are facing the possibility of felony charges on anything to do with providing a patient with abortion care, even if it's necessary to save their life? To know that that's who you're going to go in front of? And that's by design. A governor can make changes to that. But also auditor and secretary of state, those are 2 other seats that sit on the redistricting commission. And if we can retake the redistricting commission and have a fair Supreme Court, we can start to build back little d democracy in Ohio, which is essential, not just for abortion access, but for so many other things that I know that we all care about. Unfortunately, Election Day isn't going to be the end of our work. It's just the beginning, because we go straight into lame duck session. And especially if we are successful on Election Day, they are going to move on so many issues, but we know for sure the one that they are going to move on is a total ban on abortion. What happens in the courts will, between now and then, obviously will have a great impact on what that looks like if they do pass a total ban on abortion. If we get a stay on the 6th week, perhaps we get a stay on the total ban. But this is a pitched battle after battle after battle in court and on the ballot every year. So we need to be prepared during lame duck session to beat this back. And we're at such a disadvantage because they have these massive majorities in the legislature, but we've beaten them back before. It took them 9 years to pass the 6-week ban, even though they had the votes. And, I think that, we can leverage political power to make them worried about their political futures. If we turn out in big enough numbers, I have lobbied in the State House enough to know that most of the people down there, they don't care about the suffering of people. They don't care about facts and figures. They don't care what medical experts say. All of the things that are happening now that they pretend like aren't happening, they knew it was going to happen because we brought people who told them, hundreds and hundreds of witnesses over the last 10 years to tell them what would happen. And it didn't make any difference. But the times when we were able to stop them, it was because they were afraid for their political futures. That is the one thing that works in the State House. And by turning out in record numbers and being loud during lame duck session, those are the things that we can do to have the most impact. And I think the last thing that I want to touch on is a ballot initiative. Many people have asked since the Dobbs decision, are we going to amend the state constitution in the state of Ohio? And the answer is probably. I think it's a matter of when, not if. We have to go to the ballot for this. I'm sure many of you saw what happened in Kansas, and that was extremely encouraging, but that was a no vote. They were voting to protect what they already had in the Constitution. But that was extremely encouraging. Michigan, they are attempting to amend their state constitution right now, and we're watching that very carefully. Reproductive health rights and justice groups are working diligently right now in Ohio, and there'll be more to come. We're examining very closely whether 2023 or 2024 would be a time for us to do this. Clearly, what's happening in the courts and what happens in these elections will be factors in that. But we will not surrender to this tyranny, and we will not allow ourselves to be held hostage for every 2-year election cycle. we will work to not just restore abortion access in Ohio, we will work to guarantee it for the future. And with that, I would be happy to take any and all questions.
Remember, folks, you either have to raise your hand in the reactions or put your question in the chat.
Deb, do you want to call on people, or do you?
Yeah, I can do that. We have a question from Pat. Go ahead, Pat. You have to unmute yourself. Okay.
No, I was just applaud. That was an applause.
Oh,
So,
all right. It went up at the same time. Sorry.
yeah, no, that was really interesting and great. Thank you.
Anybody have a question?
Looks like
Looks
Randy.
like Randy.
Okay, Randy. You have to unmute. Randy, you have to unmute. There we go.
Okay, there we go. One of the big news items nationally has been the great increase in voter registration by women. It's been off the charts in many states, and I just wondered, has there been any? Do you have any data on what's going on here in Ohio on that?
I don't have specific on that data on that now. What I can tell you is we are seeing increases in voter registration, and we are seeing in polling. It used to be when you would ask people what's the most important issue, abortion really wouldn't even be on the list. It is a banger now. It is at the top of the list. People are focused. And I think they're focused in a way that they weren't before, because let's face it, most people under Roe, not everyone, but most people felt like if they needed to access an abortion that they could. And they didn't expect to lose a right that they had had for nearly 50 years. So, you know, it wasn't something that was high on people's voting list for a long time because they felt like it was an established right, and it should have been. But, you know, we are seeing an increase both in interest and in voter registration, but I can't give you specific numbers, Randy.
Kelly, I actually saw an article on that a couple weeks ago. And at that time, Ohio was second percentage-wise in the country to Kansas. Now, of course, Kansas had the constitutional amendment. And it was at that time a 6.4% increase among women registered voters in Ohio. And one other thing on that this might be kind of humorous. Kelly mentioned the Ohio Supreme Court races. Up until this election, when you voted for a Supreme Court justice, you didn't have the party affiliation. Right. This time you will. So if you think of the 6.4% of increase in women voters, if they just registered to vote, they may not know the particulars. They may only know the Democrats are the good guys and the Republicans are the bad guys. So it may turn out to be something good.
Yeah. Well, and I see in the chat that Sean is asking about ballot language. That is an extremely complicated situation because of the way that ballot language is approved to go on the ballot in Ohio. As you know, we have a ballot board, and it also, the Attorney General has a big role to play in that. And let's face it, if it is David Yost, we're going to have trouble with that. We'll have trouble with the ballot board. And so that typically ends up being appealed to the state Supreme Court. So it's another reason why what's happening in this, you know, because a lot of people have wanted to go to the ballot right away. And it just simply, given the Ohio election calendar, it wasn't something that was doable this year. But also there are things that have to kind of happen in order. And one of those things, if possible, is for us to get an Attorney General and a Supreme Court to give us the best chance to get the language we want on the ballot. And as we're looking at language, some of that, you know, may be influenced by what happens in the courts. I mean, there's going to be a lot of factors to that.
So we have one more question that came up in the chat, and then we've got two people that have their hands raised. From Bob Parker, whoever wins for Chief Justice, who fills their vacant seat?
Mike DeWine does. Because the Supreme Court term starts on January 1st. Or wait a minute. They start January 1st and the governor starts January 6th. So even if he loses, he still gets to appoint the vacancy, which is why it's kind of like this complicated word problem, like how many justices do we need to win to get the majority, because one Republican's leaving and two incumbents are running. But regardless of who wins for Chief Justice, both Jennifer Brunner and Sharon Kennedy will remain on the state court. The question will be which one of them is the justice and which is the Chief Justice. So
Okay, Jennifer, go ahead.
Hello. Hi, Kelly. Thank you for being the amazing person that you are.
You're
So I have a
amazing.
couple questions. One, for Deb and Steve, can you please make sure that we get the links for all of the abortion funds that Kelly mentioned, and make sure that we all get that emailed to us? Because I think it's super, super important that we assist them in any way possible, and preterm. So that'd be great. And then a question for Kelly is, you said that today we have this great court case that we won, but it's only for 14 days. Is there any way for that to get pushed to an extra 14 days and more beyond that?
Yes, they will be going back into court to ask for a longer stay. Will there be another 14-day stay and then a longer stay, or will they get a longer stay right away? I don't know. Poor Jessie Hill, she is the lead litigator on this case. She's a marvel, and the decision came out, and I haven't had a chance to get all the details from her on that yet, but the hope is that we get a longer stay. It may come in like 2 chunks before that happens, but based on the ruling, and I would suggest that if you're a dork like me, read the ruling. It's incredible. I mean, it's an absolute shellacking of the state. And I was also really moved about how intentional the judge was in lifting up the suffering of people who have been impacted by this. That is, so many people make this so political and so legalistic, and they leave out the people who are most impacted. And I was really moved that the judge didn't do that. I'll be rereading it again. I had to read it really quickly to make comment, but I really recommend people read it if you're interested.
Our next question comes from John.
Yes, as you know, the voting registration deadline here in Ohio is October the 11th. Are we having any voter registration campaigns between now and then?
I believe that Cleveland Votes, New Voices for Reproductive Justice, of course, the Democratic Party, a lot of groups are doing that work. And I assume your organization is as well.
John, in tomorrow's newsletter, we're piggybacking off a group called the Ohio Progressive Action Leaders. There'll be links to several voter registration events that are going on, and also early vote events to try to convince folks to vote early. So you get our newsletter, it'll be in there.
And Denise.
Okay, thank you. And hi, Kelly. I'll second Jen's Kelly is awesome
You're
commentary
awesome.
from before. All right, so you told us some of the things that we can do immediately. I'm curious about effectiveness of actions. One thing you didn't mention is hold rallies, and I think there's differing viewpoints of the value of rallies. They're good feel-good opportunities minimally, but how effective are they in getting a message across? And also things like text banking, phone banking, and postcard writing.
Yes, I mean, I think rallies can be really helpful. If for nothing else than to be together. I think that at historic times and times like that, it's important to be with each other. You know, like when you ask what's effective, I mean, sometimes what's effective is being with each other and leaning on each other and taking care of each other. You know, I wouldn't be surprised to see some calls for things like that during lame duck. You know, to raise attention, because I think rallies are often most important when you're trying to draw attention to something when your opponents would rather not have attention on it. It's a way to frankly get earned media on an issue when it might otherwise, you know, be ignored. I think in terms of text banking, postcard writing, all of that voter engagement and that relational organizing is critically important. The most effective way to get people to vote at all or to vote a particular way is that personal contact. You know, and whether you're doing that in your sphere of influence among your family and friends, whether you're doing that organized with a campaign or an organization, that is critically important, particularly in a state like Ohio, where I'm going to be brutally honest with you, you know, big national funders are not pouring money into Ohio. But, you know, time and talent from volunteers is even more important in a situation like that. We, you know, in the things that we'll send out afterwards, we'll send a way for you to kind of sign up for our ramp up for repro trainings, but also people who sign up to volunteer with us, we're going to be asking people to do text banks and other things to educate people about voting, particularly about that state Supreme Court, which a lot of people just, they don't know what the state Supreme Court is. They don't know who's on it. They don't know why it's important. It's not something that, you know, people talk about, and it's something that we can do something right now to change what's happening in Ohio with that. So I think those are really important. I think other things are supporting the abortion funds and the abortion clinics. And I think one of the other things I'm going to put in the links that Steve will send out is kind of an activist toolkit about how to talk about abortion. I think that's really important. To talk about it in a way that's authentic to you, but that isn't stigmatizing. You know, to move away from saying things like safe, legal, and rare, and saying, you know, that it should be, you know, available without stigma and delay. You know, things that are steeped in your values and don't unintentionally lean into the stigma and shame that our opponents like to put on it, which is really the foundation for all of their legislative and their legal attacks. You know, they have been working overtime to demonize people who have abortions and provide abortions. And one of the most important things that we can do is not buy into it. And furthermore, stand up and say, that's not what I think. I think if a person needs an abortion, they should be able to get it. And I don't think that the state should be able to tell them, you know, otherwise. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a person who has an abortion. I know and love people. Everyone knows someone who's had an abortion. You know, I think those are important. That hearts and minds, that culture shift is really important. And I think, frankly, that stigma and shame is a lot of what got us here. So I think that's really important.
We have another question in the chat. What are some of the most important actions we can do right now? And this is from Nicole Martin. What are some of the most important actions we can do right now? Voter registration, assisting with canvassing for Nan Whaley and the Supreme Court noms, all of the above?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the above. You know, I think the Supreme Court races and Nan, frankly, she does not have the name recognition that I would like to see her have. Inexplicably, people seem to still think highly of Mike DeWine. And I think it's really important to be part of any effort that educates people about how terrible he is and how truly wonderful Nan is. I mean, you know, she worked on abortion access with us in Dayton to protect that city's only clinic for years before she ever ran for governor. When she was mayor, she worked behind the scenes. She worked on the front lines. She's the kind of person that we need in office, and she is worthy of our blood, sweat, and tears. She's the kind of person we need as governor. And Mike DeWine, I mean, I think he's still coasting on goodwill from Dr. Amy Acton that frankly, in my view, is a little bit like stolen valor. He doesn't deserve it.
So do we have any other questions? Looks like that's it, Steve.
Okay, what's next? We have some events coming up in October, kind of piggybacking off of what we talked about tonight. The first one, October 6th, and this is the first of a series of events, deals with something called crisis pregnancy centers. Now, I'm looking around, most of you probably know what those are, but if not, you kind of think of that name. Okay, if I'm a woman and I have a pregnancy and I don't know what to do, it's a crisis, I'm going to go somewhere to get all the information I need. Don't go there, because what these crisis pregnancy centers really are is a front for religious fundamentalists, and they will do everything they can to prevent you from having an abortion if that's what you choose to do. They are not medically accredited at all, but they kind of give the appearance that they are. Now, there are 6 of these crisis pregnancy centers in Cuyahoga County. We're visiting the first one on October 6th. It's the Cleveland Crisis Pregnancy Center. It's in Ohio City on Lorraine, and this will all be in the email you get tomorrow. So, don't worry about writing down the address or anything like that. And our intent at these visits to the crisis pregnancy centers is informational. We want to have a lot of people with posters. We want to have a lot of handouts with information. But our intent with these visits is not to do what the other side does, and that is to harass people that are going in and out. The people going in and out are going to see us. Okay, we're going to have good numbers at these events. We've got case medical students. We got the Progressive Caucus apparatus. We have nurses. Okay, we're going to get a lot of people for these events. The purpose is informational. The people going in and out are going to see us, and they're going to wonder what we're there for. But our purpose is not going to be at all to harass them. And we are hopeful that we get publicity, and we are hopeful that we can visit all 6. Now, we have tentative dates in mind for visits to the others, but one of the things that we don't want to do is announce all of the dates ahead of time, because we think that after a while they're going to get wind that we're coming, and the less time they have to prepare, the better off we are. We're kind of doing scouting reports, to the ones that we're going to go to. And I see Emily Hollidays on this call. She scouted the one on East 185th Street near her house. Let's give her a round of applause. So the first one, October 6th, we're going to send you the details, but there will be others. Okay, there's one in Lakewood, there's one in Parma Heights, I think Garfield Heights, East 185th Street, and we'll let you know when we're going to those. Now, for the October 6th event, we are going to have a sign making party at our office on Monday night, October 3rd, from 6 to 8 p.m. And the address and everything will be in the email tomorrow. We did have some concerns when we set up the sign making, and I am looking around the room, and I know some of you have a similar concern. Wait a minute, October 3rd, that could be when the Guardians clinch the American League Central Division Championship. I know, Jennifer. So if you could come to the sign making party, I guarantee we will have the Guardians game on in our office, if that should occur. So also in October, and this will be October 18th, our October membership meeting. Heather Booth is going to be our special guest. Now, Heather Booth is an elderly woman right now, but in the 1960s, she worked for an organization called the Janes. And what the Janes did was they provided abortion care before the Roe decision. Now, Heather Booth is also an activist in a lot of other fronts. She's an iconic figure. And if you go to either Hulu or HBO Max, there's a documentary that was just released this summer about the Janes, and Heather is featured prominently in this documentary. I don't know if anybody has seen it yet, but we are very fortunate that she is going to be attending our October 18th meeting. So that's about it about our upcoming events. And soon we'll be planning a live holiday party. We haven't done that in a couple of years. So before we go, does anybody have any questions?